All right, my name is Howard Eber, and I am a recovered alcoholic. I want to welcome everybody to, I guess, what is now week number 53 of this cycle of the Big Book Comes Alive Step Study Workshop. We are in chapter 7. Last week we read at the end of chapter 6, Bill said that the next chapter, chapter 7, is entirely devoted to step 12. And we talked about the fact that while that is true, it's not entirely accurate because while this chapter is devoted to step 12, it is only devoted to one part of step 12. Step 12 is a three-part step made up of a promise. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, the greatest promise we offer the newcomer is the first part of the 12th step. And it's covered in the doctor's opinion and the first 6 chapters. You want to learn how to have that spiritual awakening, read those, work with a sponsor, and you will have that. The second part of the step is what we're now talking about, which is the charge. Nothing in life is free. So we're being charged, we're being billed, we're being given a responsibility in the second part of the 12th step, which is to tell people of our experience and, more importantly, help them to have the same experience we've had. And that's the charge of the second part of the step. And the third part is the greatest challenge of all, to practice these principles in all of our affairs, to practice these steps, because the message in the second part of the step, the principle in the third part of the step, all refers to the subject in the first part of the step, which is spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So we are going to be focusing in chapter 7 on the second part of the 12th step, which is working with others. The first part of the chapter, the first few pages, deals with how do you find people to work with? And there's a lot of dated stuff here that just isn't of much value today. You want to find people to work with, go to a meeting. There are people dying of alcoholism, languishing at the back of the room of every meeting you go to, and it's our fault. We're letting it happen. We're not grabbing those people and letting them know that this is a life and death matter, that it is a race. Anyone who tells you take your time, it's not a race, get away from those people. Get away as fast as you possibly can because it is a race. Their window of opportunity is closing, and the obsession to use will return. Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a year? Is it a month? I don't know. I like to assume it's like 48 hours away. So we get busy right away. We get busy, stay busy, get other people busy. So what most of this chapter is going to focus on is, what do you do once you have that prospect? Since obtaining the prospect is kind of dated, some of the information is valid, and we'll talk about that. What we're going to focus on is, once you've got that person, what do you say to them? How do you get them to ask the right questions? If this is a program of attraction, of attraction rather than promotion, we have to attract them to get to the point of asking the right question, which is, how did you do it? And then we can promote the answer that we found. So it's actually a program of promotion after attraction. So where we started in the directions for working with others, the very first thing we were told is on page 89, paragraph 3, the paragraph that begins with, so perhaps you are not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. The first direction for working with others is on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 6th line. It says, don't start out as an evangelist or a preacher. We're not here to preach. We don't talk down to people, and we're certainly not temperance workers. That's kind of a dated expression. You know, when this book was written, there were temperance workers, there were temperance organizations. Not a big deal today. But I guess the point of that is, think about how you would react if somebody came at you and had a book in front of them and they were quoting from that book, and they look like, the Alcoholics Anonymous's version of Jimmy Swaggart. For me, I would run away as fast as I possibly could. So think about how you would react to that. So that's the first direction for working with people, is don't start out as an evangelist or a reformer. If you turn to the next page, the second direction is the second line. Find out all you can about him. When you get your prospect, find out all you can. Now, what do we really need? What do we need to find out at this point? And it's one thing. Do you want to stop? That's all. The first thing we have to find out is, do you want to stop? Now, when this book was written, again, it was assuming you're being called into someone's home or being brought into a situation to talk to a member of the family who is having problems with alcohol. But today, if you go to a meeting and the person is sitting in a meeting, you can pretty well assume they want to stop. Otherwise, what are they doing there? Stopping for coffee? You can get a lot better coffee down at Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. So you don't come to us for stale donuts either. So the first question is, you want to stop? That's on line 2. That is number 2. Then in the next paragraph, the third line is direction number 3. Get an idea of his 1, behavior, 2, his problems, 3, his background, 4, the seriousness of his condition, and 5, his religious leanings. Sit and talk with them. If you're at a meeting, maybe take them outside, maybe go for a ride, get away from other people and start to chat with them. Get an idea of these things. Find out what you can about his behavior, his problems, his background, just how serious his problems are, and how he feels about the G word. Let's try and find out a little bit about his religious leanings, his spiritual leanings, his attitude towards God. And again, you'll need this information, and Bill tells us to put yourself in his place to see how you would like him to approach you. And the word approach is circled in blue, a blue highlighter, because we like to identify all of the approach references, so that if you want to just run through it and show people how many times Bill mentions approach, that this is not sit back and take the attitude of being available for the newcomer. In today's culture, I think that has become, unfortunately, more of a rule than anything else. And it's not the way it's supposed to be. The book is very clear. Bill tells us to approach the person who's new, the person who's struggling, the person who's having difficulty, the person who's new. Approach them. That's our job. So we're going to highlight it in blue every time we see it, so that whenever you want to point it out to someone, you just thumb through the book and you look for the blue highlighters, and there you go. And I think we've counted about 30 in our approach references. If you want a copy of that list, just send me a request at thebigbookstudy@aol.com and ask for the approach references, and I'll be glad to send it to you. That's number 3. Number 4 is on the next paragraph, the paragraph that begins with, sometimes it's wise. The line I want to get to is 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. Don't deal with him when he is very drunk. That is direction number 4. And if my memory serves me, that's where we left off last week in terms of the number of directions. Don't deal with him when he's very drunk. Please underline or circle the word very, because we're not, if you're dealing with a real alcoholic, you couldn't get me when I was completely sober. I never want to be in that position. I was always at some level of intoxication, or always thinking of getting and using and finding ways and means to get and use more. So to try and wait till somebody is completely clean and sober, I think that's unrealistic. Not when he's very drunk. If Ebby Thatcher would have walked away from Bill because Bill was drinking the minute he walked into that kitchen, we probably wouldn't be here today. But Bill wasn't very drunk. They sat there for hours and Bill was drinking all through it and he was making sense. He wasn't stupid, out of his mind, drunk. And that's what we're talking about. Don't talk to someone when they're really stupid drunk. Get them to the emergency room, get them to a detox, get them to the point where they can understand what it is that we're trying to talk to them. And the next one, number 5, is on the next page. And I'm going to start, I believe this is exactly where we left off, with see your man alone if possible. I'm going to suggest you highlight that whole paragraph. And I'm sorry? That's number 5, right? That's direction number 5. Beanie, you want to put up the directions for working with others? This is what we're talking about. It's in your email. If you didn't get a copy of it, just send me a request and I'll get you a copy. I'm sure Anita could put a link for it in the chat, but I'll send it to you if you want it. But yeah, there we go. But we're going to go through them one at a time here. So you don't necessarily have to have that in front of you, but it helps. We are on number 5. That says,
sorry, can you make that bigger?
I'm sorry?
Can you make that bigger? It's very small.
How's that? That better? Okay. Okay. See your man alone if possible. Please underline that. That doesn't mean we go into it alone. I always like to take somebody with me, preferably somebody who's new and hasn't done this before, so they can see how it's done. When they say see your man alone, they mean without family members present. And you're going to see over the course of the next paragraph or 2 or 3 that he repeats that over and over. He already said that in the previous paragraph where he said, though you've talked with the family, leave them out of the first discussion. That's in the previous paragraph. But number 5 is just simply see your man alone, and then after a while, turn to some phase of drinking. I'm sorry, at first, engage in general conversation. There's number 5. See your man alone, and at first engage in general conversation. Take note of the environment. If you're in his home and he's got posters on the wall, talk to him about Miles Davis. Talk to him about Nina Simone. Talk to him about whatever it is you see. If he's got a T-shirt on, that's a team, or a hat that's a team. Talk to him about those things. Just general conversations. That's all. And when I said take note of his environment, it's if you're in that. If you're, let's say you're sitting in the front seat of his car. What's he got on the radio? What do you see in the car that you could talk about? So let's continue that paragraph. After a while, and you may want to underline after a while, turn the talk to some phase of drinking, not recovery, drinking. This is the time for the war stories. Tell them enough about your drinking. Underline that word your, please. Your drinking habits, symptoms, underline habits, symptoms, and experiences. Let's underline those 3 words. To encourage him to speak of himself, and underline twice, encourage him to speak of himself. One of the things we like to do in these workshops is blow up myths, things, misconceptions, things that aren't in the book. I do a whole presentation called That Ain't in the Big Book. And one of the things we talk about it is when people tell the newcomer, shut up and listen, or take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. It's very hard to understand what they're saying when they have a mouthful of cotton. The book is very clear. It tells us to encourage him to speak. We are controlling the discourse here. We're not letting the guy run off into the outfield with whatever it is he wants to talk about. We're controlling it. We're telling him about our drinking habits and symptoms and encouraging him to speak of himself. Bear in mind, We are talking about drinking. We're not talking about recovery. We are certainly not talking about spirituality. This is the time for the war stories. Beanie, you could take that down. We don't need to have that up the whole time. Folks have the book in front of them. That's more important. Continue. Encourage him to speak of himself. If he wishes, please underline, let him do so. Another myth debunked. Shut up and listen. Out the window. Out the window. If you want, we want people to feel welcome here, and we want people to feel appreciated. And telling somebody to shut up just isn't right. I would never say that to anybody I love, even my little puppy. I shut up is not an expression that endears people together. So, if he wishes to talk, let him do so. You will thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. If he's not communicative, please underline, give him a sketch of your drinking career and underline twice up to the time you quit. Again, bear in mind, this is the war story. This is the time for the drinking and the drugging experiences. We're not talking about recovery. We want the person to see themselves in us. So we tell our story. Remember that what got Dr. Bob's attention with Bill was Bill sat down and he said, "You look like you could use a drink, pal. Let me tell you a bit about my story." And he told him his story. And a 15-minute conversation turned into 6 hours. And when he walked out of that room, he turned to his wife and he said, "This guy is the first person I ever met who knew what he was talking about alcoholism." And what did Bill do? He told him his story. He got his attention. He got Dr. Bob to identify that this isn't some joker from New York who's trying to convince him of some get sober scheme. He's telling him his story so that he could see himself and begin to think, yeah, I did that. That's just like me. Yeah, I can identify with that. And that's the whole point. Give him talk about your drinking up until the time you quit and underline, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. We are trying to extract that a question from him. And the only way we could, or her, the only way we could do that is by giving enough information about what our drinking was like so that they may begin to think, well, gee, how did you do it? I'm sitting here and I can't put together a few hours or a day or two, and you've got whatever time you have. How'd you do that? That's what we want to get to. Say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. If he's in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquors caused you. Please underline this, but be careful not to moralize or lecture. Moralize, to me, means speaking in terms of good and bad, black and white, acceptable, not acceptable. See the point here? We're not going to be telling a story of what we did when we were drinking and preface it by saying, I did a horrible thing and I know it was terrible, but, or tell what we did and then moralize afterwards, say, I know it was an ugly thing, it was a terrible thing. We don't do that because we got that from the people around us telling us terrible things that we did. We know that. So we don't have to do that to that guy, that person. Let them formulate their opinions on their own. So we're not going to moralize and we're not lecturing. Remember, what got Bill's attention was when Eber told his story. And he didn't speak down to him, and he spoke in no holier than thou manner. So if his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his. We all have those stories. We all have those stories. Most of those stories are the kind of stories that if you tell at a meeting, everybody will laugh at it. If you tell it at home or at work, the people you're around, like, oh my God, those are terrible. Oh my God, that you did that? No, we laugh at the things that people think are so horrible. We laugh at those things. So tell him some humorous stories. When he sees, all about the drinking game, and this is number 7, incidentally. I let's go back up a bit. I skipped 6. After a while, on the second line of that paragraph, it says, after a while, turn the talk to some phase of drinking. The rest of that paragraph is number 6. All the way through to being careful not to lecture. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories, get him to tell some of his. That is all number 6, direction number 6. Here is number 7, the first line on the next paragraph. When he sees you know all about the drinking game, commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Circle the word yourself. And someone in one of the workshops suggested that be highlighted in green because it seems like a must. And I think there's something to be said for that. So you may want to highlight that in green. That's a must. Describe yourself as an alcoholic. Basically, we told them our drinking stories, the funny stories, the serious stories. And what we're doing, in a sense, is painting a picture for this guy. And we're holding up this picture and say, see this picture I just painted? This picture is called an alcoholic. That's what I am. I've just told you what's in this picture, and the picture is that of an alcoholic. But I'm describing myself. I'm not describing him. Don't call him or her an alcoholic. Describe yourself as an alcoholic. Top of page 92. Here's number 8. Tell him how baffled you are, how you finally learned that you were sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink of a spree. That's all number 8. That's all highlighted. And since I blew through it all real fast, let me go slow it down. Tell him how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. Let's underline or circle that word, sick. We're not bad people. We're not immoral people. We're not weak people. We are tiptoeing up to the definition of being an alcoholic. We just painted this picture and we said it's an alcoholic. Now we're going to define, what does that mean? He's got a notion of what an alcoholic means. I know I did when I came in here. And my notion of an alcoholic was some guy on the Bowery who is sleeping above a subway grating in a refrigerator box. That's an alcoholic to me. We're going to have to change that conception with some people. But so tell him how baffled you are. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink of the spree. We're starting to talk about the mental obsession. How we know what's going to happen, yet we tell ourselves, this time it'll be different. This time I'll stop at this. This time I'll stop at that. This time I'll do this. Whatever it is, tell them about that mental twist that leads to that first drink, that the problem is not the 10th or the 15th drink. The problem is the first drink. I know what's going to happen, yet I take it knowing full well what the end result's going to be. That obsession, that mental twist that leads to the first drink. We suggest you do this as we have done in the chapter on alcoholism, chapter 3. In other words, the failure of self-will. That's what chapter 3 is about. The failure of self-will. The crossing over from sane to insane. Believing in the truth and then making a decision based on believing in a lie. So we're starting to define what the obsession is, what an obsession is, rather. So we suggest you do this as we've done in the chapter on alcoholism. If he's an alcoholic, he'll understand you at once. He'll match your mental inconsistencies. Let's highlight mental inconsistencies. And above it, I've written insanity of the first drink. That's the mental inconsistency, that we know what's going to happen, yet we do it because we convince ourselves of some cock and bull story, of some lie, and we make a decision based on that lie, and we take action based on that lie, and then we can't stop. So the problem is not the alcohol. The problem is the lie that starts us drinking in the first place. So match your mental inconsistencies. He'll match some of those mental inconsistencies with some of his own. This is number 9. Number 9 starts with if you are satisfied and runs all the way to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down, which ends with prevents normal functioning of willpower. Now, let me read that and we'll talk about it. If you are satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition surrounding the first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. Stop. That's number 9. That's number 9. We are defining the obsession. We're getting him to that point. So if here's another myth debunked, incidentally. They tell you in AA that it's not our job to decide if someone is an alcoholic or not. The book just told me otherwise. The book told me that I have to be satisfied that he's a real alcoholic. And above real alcoholic, I've written allergy/obsession. That's the real alcoholic. If I'm satisfied that he's a real alcoholic. Why? Because I'm going to work with this guy or I'm not going to work with this guy. And if he's not a real alcoholic, I'm not going to waste my time. So I have to decide whether this guy is a real alcoholic or not. In the end, yes, it's his decision. He has to do that. But we're talking about getting started with the guy. And I don't want to get started with somebody who's a moderate drinker or a hard drinker and not the real thing. There's a lot of work and a lot of time involved. And if he's not the real article, he doesn't need to be here. So if I'm satisfied he's a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature. Please underline that word, hopeless. Show him from your own experience. Let's underline experience, not theory, not book learning, not education, not lectures you've attended. From your own experience, not theory, how the, please underline, queer mental condition, which is another way of saying the obsession of the mind. So show him, tell him from our experience how we dealt with that obsession of the mind that surrounds the first drink. And here's the kicker. It prevents normal functioning of the will. Please underline normal functioning of the will. That's a reference to the allergy of the body. It's a reference to craving, that the obsession causes us to take that first drink. Once we take that first drink, we trigger this non-functioning of the willpower. It's like we threw a switch and the willpower is no longer effective. Willpower, which used to be a viable higher power in a sense, no longer is. So, which prevents normal functioning of the will, which, in other words, it prevents us from stopping. The allergy has kicked in. We've taken that first drink, we've triggered the allergy. And we can explain what that means. But let's continue. If he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking, tell him possibly he can. If he's not too alcoholic, maybe he's just a little pregnant, right? There's no such thing as a little pregnant or a little dead. If you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. So, but insist that if he is severely afflicted, you may want to highlight and underline those two words, severely afflicted, and above it, I've written the real alcoholic. That this is a guy who has the allergy and the obsession. There may be little chance he can recover by himself. We highlight the word recover in orange because we highlight all recovered references. People who say you're not supposed to say recovered at meetings, the book is full of it. So we highlight it in orange so we can show it to people. But underline that last two words, by himself, because this is a process. We told him about our drinking. We defined that's the drinking of an alcoholic. But what is an alcoholic? An alcoholic has this obsession, and we described the obsession, and it triggers the allergic reaction of craving. If we have to define allergy, let's define it. You tell them an allergy is defined as an abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or chemical. See, if you told me in the beginning that I have an allergy, I'd laugh in your face. But if you explained to me what a definition of that word is, I might have considered it because it makes sense. When I hear an allergy is an abnormal reaction, I know I have an abnormal reaction to these chemicals. I knew from the first time I ever tried it that I consume things at a rate that just blows everybody away. Just what everybody I ever partied with at some point told me, you got to slow it down. It's way out of hand. So, and then we're getting to the point of not being able to recover by ourselves. We're going to try and get from step 1 to step 2.
We actually just missed, I think it's direction 10.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry. I might have forgotten that. Thank you. Number 10 is what we're coming up to. And be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusion. Let's highlight and underline that. Be careful not to brand him. Let him draw his own conclusion. This is a great opportunity to ask him or her the questions that we were asked on page 52, which come down to, well, let's turn to it. Let's keep our place on 92, but let's go back to 52. Page 52.
40.
Did I say 52?
44.
I'm on the wrong page. Yeah. It's the first page of We Agnostics.
44.
44. I'm sorry. Yes. Page 44. Sorry, I gave you the wrong page. On about the third or fourth line, it says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. Remember when we read this, we turned that statement into 2 questions. And this might be a great time when working with a newbie to ask those questions. Have you been able to quit entirely on your own? If the guy says yes, then shake his hand and send him on his way because he does not need to do this work. My question to him would be, then what are you doing here? Either you're able to quit on your own, which means you don't need to be here, or you're lying to yourself. One of those things. But if indeed you're not able to quit on your own entirely, I don't mean just one chemical and then substitute something else. We may have to go through that explanation with the guy, but we let him know. if you've not been able to quit entirely, or do you have any control once you start? Once you start, what happens? That first asks for the second demands the third screams out for the fourth. And by the time I get to the 10th, I want that 11th drink more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. Can you identify with that? It's a good time to ask those questions of the guy. If he's going to decide on his own, give him some parameters, give him some terminology, give him some room to figure out. Oh, yeah, maybe I am, because I know I have an abnormal reaction. You may have to describe that. You may have to tell him a normal person at some point is offered another drink or another line or another pill or another hit, and they say, no, thank you. Maybe they'll get sick if they do more, or they got to drive, so they got to take it easy. Or they start saying some very queer stuff like, I don't need any more. I'm right where I want to be. And I always drank and drug with the expectation of arriving where I wanted to be. But it was always, the promised land was always a couple of drinks away. It was just one more, just one more. That's an abnormal reaction. The normal reaction is to at some point say no. I've never been able to do that. As long as there were chemicals around and I was conscious, I was using it. I passed out or ran out is the only way I stopped. So ask him those questions. So let's get back to where we were on page 92. Ask him those questions that are on page 44, not the other page. Okay. Number 10. That's 11, right?
That's first.
Right. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. If you can recover by himself. Here's number 11. And I'm going to suggest you may want to highlight the whole paragraph that begins with continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness. Just highlight it all the way through to the end of the paragraph on the next page. Keep it simple. Just highlight it all, beginning with continue to speak and go all the way through to that he lived by spiritual principles. I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay. This is number 11. And please underline the first sentence, which is continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Underline, talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. In other words, obsession and allergy. Talk about the obsession. Talk about the allergy. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Underline that. We're not telling him, we're not accusing him. This is our experience. Explain that many are doomed to never realize their predicament. This is all about getting his attention by focusing on our problem. We are telling him exactly what's wrong with him without telling him, by telling him what's wrong with us. That's all. This is our story. Okay. And again, I've underlined, explain that many are doomed. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it'll serve some good purpose. You bet. Doctors are afraid of sounding hopeless. We, on the other hand, it is our job to give this person a bad case of hopelessness. That's what we want. We want the guy to feel hopeless. At the point of desperation is the time in which we are most likely to follow suggestions, to take suggestions, to be honest about ourselves. So Don't be afraid to make him sound hopeless. Doctors are afraid. Why? Because they don't have an answer to the next question, which is, okay, doc, what do I do about it? The doctor will give you a prescription for a Valium shortage and deficiency, and that'll be the end of that. That's all they know. We're not afraid of making the guy feel hopeless and absolutely desperate and feeling like quicksand surrounds him on all sides. Why? Because we have a solution. We have an answer for that guy. So, doctors are loath to tell an alcoholic the whole story unless it will serve some purpose. And let's underline this, but you may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism. And I'm even underlining this 2 or 3 times because you offer a solution. We're not afraid to make him feel hopeless and desperate. In fact, that's our objective. You'll soon have your friend admitting he has many, if not all, of the traits of the alcoholic. If his own doctor is willing to tell him he's alcoholic, so much the better. Here's number 12. Number 12 starts with, even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he's become quite curious to know how you got well. Please underline the next sentence. Let him ask you that question. Let him ask you that question. Here's number 13. Starting with tell him exactly, and it runs to the end of the paragraph. But notice the squiggly writing, italics for those of you who don't come from the Naugatuck Valley in Connecticut. We call it squiggly writings over there, but they call it italics everywhere else. When you see italics, it means this is important. Tell him exactly what happened to you. Please underline that. Tell him what happened to you. What happened to me is not, I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. It doesn't mean I took commitments. I showed up at all these meetings. No. Here's what happened to me. I discovered a power that was able to do for me what I couldn't do for myself. I accessed a power greater than myself that was able to get between me and that first drink. I accessed that power. That's what I did. And when it says stress the spiritual feature freely, the spiritual feature, you may want to circle that word, not the religious feature. This is a perfect time to define those terms for your prospect. We're not talking about religion. We're talking about spirituality. What's the difference, you say? Well, religion is a set of practices. If you want to belong to our club and worship our imaginary best friend, there's certain things you have to do, directions you must follow. Pray like this, dress like this, eat like this, go to temple like this, stand, kneel, whatever, what they call Catholic calisthenics, right? Stand, bow, kneel, step, right? That's religion, is a set of practices. You want to belong to the club, this is what you have to do. We're talking about spirituality, and spirituality is about discipline. You have to have a discipline for this higher power, this God. But it's your conception, not mine, your conception. And the same thing for things like prayer and meditation. No one's going to tell you how to do that. You have to develop a discipline for that, and that is entirely yours, not mine. It's important. I wish someone would have tried that, at least tried that with me when I came in the early 80s. I didn't hear that for 24 years. I did not know that. 24 years in and around the program, I did not know that. I like to think it might have made a difference. So tell them we're not talking about religion. So stress the spiritual feature. If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that, and let's underline the squiggly writing, he does not have to agree with your conception of God. In fact, I'm not even telling him what my conception of God is. This might be an opportunity to suggest that he take a pen and a piece of paper and write out the qualities that he would like that power to have. What traits? All knowing, all seeing, forgiving, loving, all powerful, sense of humor, all of those things. What do you think your higher power should be like? Write it down on a piece of paper. And when I was told to do that, and I went back to to my counselor to show him the list, he pushed it away. He said, I don't want to see that. I'm not the least bit interested in what you have written. I am entirely interested in the fact that you now have something written down. You now have your own conception of this higher power. I got tricked into doing that. I didn't realize that's what he was getting me to do. When he told me, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Now I see the difference between religion and spirituality. You're not interested in what I have written down because what you have on your paper is going to be different than mine. And this beautiful thing, he doesn't have to agree with your conception of God. What a liberating thing that is. Continuing, he can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. To him. By telling them our conception, I think we run the risk of prejudicing or handicapping our prospect. Remember, we're there to be helpful. We're not there to force our particular conception of God on the prospect. We're not. Let them come up with their own conception. And let's underline the squiggly writing here. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself, and he live by spiritual practices. May want to circle spiritual and next to it, right? Not religious. We're not talking about religion here. We're talking about spirituality. The point that we're making, this last sentence, the italics, is to communicate that he has to admit that he cannot do this on his own. We have already gotten to him admit that he hasn't been able to quit entirely on his own. We've got him to admit that once he starts, he can't stop. He doesn't have any control over it. That's what we want him to see, that he doesn't have the ability, the self-will, the self-knowledge. He doesn't have the ability to make a decision to stop and stay stopped. He's got to acknowledge that. And that's the whole point of this last sentence. Spiritual practices. Okay. Spiritual principles. What did I say? Practices? Yeah, sorry. Principles. Okay, here's number 14. Well, actually, number 14 is not there. Number 14 is make a list of the traits that you would like your higher power to have. So write that in between those two paragraphs. Give them an assignment. Ask them to write down the qualities he'd like his higher power to have, or hers. This is the time for it. We're stressing that it has to be your conception. So how about you take a minute and write that down? Think about what that might mean. Do it. And you have something to build on. You have something to start at. We have a reasonable assumption. Remember that? We have to have a reasonable assumption as a starting point. And the reasonable assumption is that's what your higher power looks like, what you have written down. It's a reasonable assumption because it's yours. I never had an assumption that wasn't reasonable. At least I didn't think. I always thought they were reasonable. They always made sense to me. If it was my idea, it had to make sense. Okay, in any case, so number 14 is make a list of traits that you would like his higher power to have. When dealing with such a person, and here's number 15, you had better use everyday language to describe spiritual principles. That's number 15. You may want to highlight and underline that. In fact, I'm going to suggest you highlight all the way to the end of that paragraph, but that simple sentence is number 15. Use everyday language to describe spiritual principles, including the steps. If we're talking about the things that we did, well, it began by recognizing, just like you just did, that I don't have the power. I lack the necessary power to fix myself. That a sick mind cannot heal a sick mind. But the good news is that there is this power that can do for me what I couldn't do for myself. And that it looks like this stuff I just wrote on that piece of paper. And then you know what I did? I made a decision to try and pursue that power, to try and access that power. So that power can do for me what I couldn't do for myself. And so I began by making a list of the things that were ruling, controlling, and dominating me up until that point. And I found out that those were my angers, because I never had a problem that wasn't due to my being angry as hell about something, scared to death about something, or terrified that you're about to find out something I did and I don't want you to find out. Now, that being the case, my life has been ruled and controlled and dominated. The point being, I'm speaking everyday language, and I just went through the first 4 steps with that guy. I didn't say step 1 is this and step 2 is that. Use everyday language. Don't be dogmatic. Think about how you would receive that. It wouldn't go over well with me. If you started quoting things like out of a book, or you go step 1, step 2, it just sounds too dogmatic to me. So use everyday language. Okay, so you better use everyday language to describe spiritual principles. There's no use arousing any prejudice or antipathy, incidentally. Prejudice or antipathy. Antipathy is a strong dislike. Antipathy is strong opposition. Prejudice is just decisions made without facts, decisions made based on ignorance. But antipathy is hatred, is hostile opposition. He may have against certain theological terms and conceptions about which he may already be confused. Don't raise such issues no matter what your own convictions are. And as I said before, bringing our conception of God into this discussion runs the risk of prejudicing or handicapping our prospect, because he's going to make a decision about his higher power based on mine. No, so we don't get into mine. Remember, we're there to be helpful, not to force something down someone's throat. Next paragraph. First 2 sentences are highlighted. Your prospect may belong to a religious denomination. Let's underline religious. His religious education and training may be far superior to yours. Let's underline religious there. Just like Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob could quote chapter and verse from the Bible. Bill was in way over his head when it got to that stuff. But Bill wasn't talking about that. Dr. Bob knew more about that than Bill did. So Bill wasn't talking about that. Bill was talking about a concept that was his own, not a religious entity. So we remember we're talking about spirituality, not religion. Continuing, in that case, he's going to wonder how you can add anything to what he already knows. But he'll be curious to learn why his own convictions, his own beliefs have not worked and why yours seem to work so well. You know, Dr. Bob had to be thinking that he's part of the Oxford group and he's taken actions based on being part of the Oxford group, but always went back to drinking because he didn't know that it was the first drink that causes the problem. So he would do this spiritual activity, whatever it was, and then he'd celebrate by having a drink and then trigger the allergy and be off to the races again. So he may be an example of the truth that, and please highlight this in pink, faith alone is insufficient. Faith alone is insufficient. On page 83, paragraph 2, you may want to go to it. Let's take a minute. Let's go to page 83, paragraph 2. Let's hold our place here. But on 83, paragraph 2, the first sentence says, the spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it. In other words, faith alone is insufficient. We have to live it. Here's another one. Let's turn to now page 88, paragraph 3. Page 88, paragraph 3, second line, faith without works is dead. So Bill has found a couple of different ways to say the same thing. Faith alone is insufficient, is what he says on 93. Spiritual life is not a theory. We have to live it, is what he said on 83. Faith without works is dead, is what he said on page 88. Continuing, and I'm going to suggest you underline and 88 is paragraph 3. 88, paragraph 3, the one that begins with, but this is not all. That second line is the point where it says faith without works is dead. That's the point we're making. Okay, let's get back to page 93. Sorry. I'm going to suggest you highlight and underline these next two sentences to be vital. Faith must, here's a must that's circled in green, be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish, constructive action. Let's circle that last word, action. And here's number 16. Let him see that you're not there to instruct him in religion. Again, we're there to talk about spirituality. We're talking about God. We're not talking about religion. So let him see that you're not there to instruct him in religion. I'm going to suggest you highlight the next sentence too. It's rather long. It's about 4 lines long, but I highlighted it. It says, admit that he probably knows more about it than you do, but call his attention to the fact that however deep his faith and knowledge, he could not have applied it or he would not drink. Now, that's the way, obviously, it's written in the book. I love our history. I love things about learning about changes that were made in the book. And here's one of those examples. Originally, that sentence said, but call to his attention the fact that however deep his faith and knowledge, there must be something wrong there must be something wrong with it or he would not drink. So there must be something wrong with it was taken out, and what was replaced with, he could not have applied it. I don't know. I kind of like the original way, but be that as it may, they changed that. Perhaps your story will help him see where he has failed to practice the very precepts he knows so well. Precepts are just rules of behavior, guidelines, practices. Remember, religion is about a set of practices. You want to be part of our club? This is what you have to do. These are the precepts. These are the rules. These are the guidelines. Dress like this, eat like this, pray like this, stand like this, kneel like this, and on and on and on. We, please underline that first word, we represent no particular faith or denomination. We, as a whole, Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, all of the anonymous fellowships, we do not represent a particular faith or denomination. As an individual, I have to represent the same thing to that prospect. I'm not representing a particular concept, a personal concept of God. Remember, that would prejudice the person. That would handicap us. So once again, we're not here to represent a particular faith or denomination. Neither is AA. Continuing, we, again, AA, are dealing only with general principles common to most denominations. You bet. I believe, and I think this is what Bill is talking about, that every religion has at its core the same thing: to try and live a life according to the principles of tolerance, compassion, patience, humility, forgiveness, love, and goodwill. Is that not at every, whether it's Judaism, Catholicism, Islamism, I don't care what your ism is, I believe at the very core of those principles, tolerance, compassion, patience, humility, forgiveness, love, and goodwill. And I believe that's what he's talking about here. Lost my place.
It's time.
Where am I? Oh, yeah, right at the top of the page. I'm sorry. This next paragraph is number 17. It starts with outlining the program, and it goes all the way to the sentence that ends with when he escapes his own difficulties. I'm going to read it. So whatever I read here is highlighted, and it is number 17. Outline the problem of action.
Program.
What's that?
Program.
Program. What'd I say?
Problem.
Okay. Outline the program of action. And again, everyday language. Explaining how you made underlined self-appraisal. And above it, I've written steps 4, 5, 6, and 7. We're explaining those steps. We're not saying this is 4, 5, 6, and so on. Remember, I used the example before of saying that all of my problems came down to being angry at something, terrified of something, or filled with guilt and shame about something. And so those things, the anger, the fear, the guilt and shame, were the motivating factors in most of my life. So I had to take this self-appraisal to find that out. And continuing how you straightened out your past. Let's underline straightened out your past. And above it, steps 8 and 9. Knowing that by acting that way, I might have hurt some people. I might have caused some damage in my life. And so part of my recovery is to make restitution for those things that I did, to make right the wrongs, to set right the wrongs. So straighten out your past, steps 8 and 9. And why you're now endeavoring to be helpful to him, let's underline endeavoring to be helpful to him. And obviously, step 12. In actuality, my sitting here talking with you today helps me much more than it helps you. That's how I stay sober, is by helping other people to achieve what I have achieved. It is important for him to realize that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital, circle that word vital. Once again, we've been defining that word since the beginning of the book. Vital is something that is life supporting, something that's indispensable, essential. You cannot live without it. It's a vital part of your own recovery. And let's underline this. Actually, he may be helping you more than you're helping him, which blows up the theory of it being a selfish program. Make it plain he's under no obligation to you, that you hope only that he will try to help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties. That last part, only that he will try to help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties, should be underlined. And what I'm stressing is basically, the thing we hear at meetings, that we'll love you until you learn to love yourself. Well, I believe that sentence tells me it's a little bit more than that, that we will love you until you learn to love somebody else, till you learn to give a damn about somebody else. That's really what it's about. In other words, thinking of me is a big part of my problem. Thinking of you is a big part of my solution. Again, thinking of me is a big part of my problem. But thinking of you is a big part of my solution. And that's what we're stressing here. All of that, like I said, up until the word difficulties, that's all number 17. Okay. Next sentence is highlighted and underlined, suggest how important it is that he place the welfare of other people ahead of his own. In other words, thinking of me is part of my problem. Thinking of you is part of my solution. That's the point we're trying to stress here. Also, when he says, show how important that he's placed the welfare of other people ahead of his own, that sounds very familiar. Hold this place and let's go back to page 89. I love connecting the dots in this book. On page 89, paragraph 2, the first phrase, life will take on new meaning. That's what we're talking about. Life will take on new meaning. By putting the welfare of other people ahead of mine, life takes on new meaning. And again, to watch people recover, to see others help others, to watch loneliness vanish, all of that. Continuing, make it clear he's under no pressure, that he needn't see you again if he doesn't want to. And let's highlight the rest of this paragraph. You should not be offended if he wants to call it off, for he has helped you more than you have helped him. If your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you will have perhaps made a friend. Here's number 18. Maybe you have disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. And number 18 is really without the first three words. Maybe you have. So really the number 18, the direction number 18 is to disturb him about the nature of alcoholism. That's what we were talking about a few minutes ago. That's the goal, is to disturb him. And if we look up disturb in the dictionary, it's defined as to unsettle, to make one uneasy. Isn't that what we're here to do? We're here to disturb about the fatal nature of alcoholism to the person who's new and to the person who's been coming around and just going to meetings and not doing anything else, not helping anybody else, and so on. A don't drink and go to meetings guy. Our job is to disturb that guy. He's a thief. That guy's a thief. He comes in and he steals the relief that we give him 1 hour at a time. Well, we want to give you freedom by working the steps. Relief comes 1 hour at a time. So my job is to disturb the other person. Our job is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. I heard a speaker say that once. Let me repeat it. Our job is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Makes perfect sense to me. Okay, continuing. Yeah, we'll get to the end of the paragraph at least. Maybe you have disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. This is all to the good. The more helpless he feels, the better. Let's underline that. In other words, the more willing he's going to be. The more hopeless he feels, the more willing he's going to be. Think about ourselves. When we were at that lowest point of desperation and hopelessness, that's when that window of opportunity was as wide as it was ever going to get. The more hopeless he feels, the better. And let's underline, you will be more likely to follow your suggestion. Willingness opens the door. And that's what we're trying to extract. We're trying to get him to be willing to open that door. And I'm going to stop at that point. We're going to